Abe Jenkins is a household name on the political scene, from working for Barack Obama's presidential campaign to working for former Charleston County Council candidate Joe Boykin. I sit down one-on-one with Abe for a special edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And be sure to download the free Quintin's Close-Ups app in your Apple or Google Play stores. And listen to this interview later on iHeartRadio. Abe Jenkins.
Quintin, Washington.
How are you?
I'm good.
That's so good to hear. And it's so great to meet you.
Good to meet you, man.
Yeah.
I'm glad to be on your show.
Oh, thank you greatly.
I feel honored and privileged to be on the Quintin, Washington show.
Oh, thank you. It's all God and great and Jesus Christ.
That's good.
Yes, indeed. God is great. Thank you, Jesus. So, I know that you emailed me, well, actually, you text messaged me a couple of days ago, and you wanted to talk to me really about the results of the Charleston County Council race between Anna Johnson and obviously Joe Boykin, in which Anna Johnson ultimately won. And you also want to talk to me about billionaire Tom Snyder's visit to Charleston. Let me begin there with the Tom Snyder's visit. Obviously, he was at the schoolhouse last night.
Right.
When you look at Tom Snyder, what do you look at as far as 2020?
Well, this is really my first experience meeting Tom Snyder. I hadn't really heard too much about him.
Okay.
Of course, Brandon Upson kind of got me involved in that.
Okay.
So I did a little research on him. And, I looked at his 5 points or his platform that he's using right now.
Right.
And I tend to agree that we should have a right to vote and conservation, clean air and conservation. So all those things sound good. And it's so early on in the game for 2020 about who's going to run for president. You really don't know, but I'm willing to listen and observe every candidate that comes forward and give them a fair opportunity to at least hear what their presentation and what their platform is all about.
And what else are you listening to when you think of the 5 rights really to vote from Tom Snyder?
Well, the reason I got involved intimately with that, and I was so glad that they came to Charleston, was because the right to vote is a very serious matter, especially for those of us in the Low Country. My grandfather, Esau Jenkins, on Johns Island, pretty much they created, with Septimus Clark and others, created the citizenship schools because African Americans or black folk were not allowed to vote. And until you're able to pass a literacy test and read part of the Constitution. So they made a strong effort to go out to teach folk that part of the Constitution that they needed to know. And people came from all over. Martin Luther King, Fannie Lou Hamer, all of them came here to see what was going on with the citizenship schools. And that spread throughout the country. So it's something that's deeply rooted for me that we're now addressing the right for everyone to have an equal vote. When you look at the elections, and I said this last night, I was one of the panelists, in Florida, every year, every election, there's problems tabulating votes. You can't count the votes right. They can't get it right. We even elected a president, which was in dispute because for some odd reason, they're miscounting votes or not counting votes. People are being disenfranchised in Georgia and Florida and Mississippi and all over the country. And these tend to seem to be deliberate attempts to take people's voting rights away from them.
And you talk about voting, you talk about the Low Country. I want to take you back to the Charleston County Council race between Joe Boykin and Anna Johnson. Obviously, you were one of his consultants for that particular race. And from what I understand and from what Brian Hicks of the Post Courier wrote, it was a very close race.
It was a very close race. It was a very close race. The thing that I think I know I underestimated and we underestimated was the turnout was tremendous. The turnout for the midterm election was the biggest turnout I had ever seen in South Carolina. I've never seen numbers like that. People were waiting 4 and 5 hours in line to vote. And so when you have situations like that, and I know on Johns Island at St. John's High School was one of the polling locations that had problems. They had 9 workers that didn't show up that day. So the lines were tremendous. Some people worked all day, came and got in line. Some stayed, but others just could not stay any longer. because they'd been to work, they had to get home, they had to feed their kids, they had to do whatever, and 3 or 4 hours after working 8 was too long for them to stay. So therein lies a problem, and this not only happened in Charleston, this happened throughout the state, where lines were long and people were waiting and waiting and waiting. So we do need to address some of the archaic ways that we're doing things. Part of the problem are the voting machines are older and don't calibrate right, or some of the problems that workers aren't trained properly and don't know how to get the technology to work in the proper manner. So there's just things, and the other thing is, why don't we have early voting in South Carolina? Why does it have to be in-person absentee, where you've got 17 or 18 different reasons that you've got to pick one to say that I'm off that day, or I got to work that day, or whatever the reason is, or I'm 65 or older. But why should you have to have a reason? Let's open this thing up so that people can vote pretty much easily at their convenience, maybe on Saturdays and Sundays for more than 3 hours, so they can work during the week and they can also exercise their right to vote in a way that's not taxing on a person, that they can do it at their convenience. And those are some of the things that sorely needed in the state to make it easier for people to vote. And my thought is that once you're a citizen of this country, why should you have to register to vote? You automatically be given the right to vote. You know, and unless I opt out and I don't want to vote, I shouldn't have to be going through getting a voter ID and make sure this matches that. Once I am a citizen of this country, and I'm a citizen of this country, I should have the right to vote.
Why the politics in voter registration?
I wish I knew the answer definitively, but it tends to seem like politicians want to be reelected. We have a major clash between parties, us against them, Democrat versus Republican, Hatfields versus the McCoys. You're either the good guys or the bad guys. That's sad. It's very, very sad. We're one country, and we can have different views. But I mean, at the end of the day, we're all Americans. So let's try to say, well, your opinion is this, my opinion is that. But you know, I tend not to agree. Let the voters decide which way they want to go, and then we move on. We don't have to be enemies. You know, because I'm an African American doesn't mean don't judge me by the color of my skin, but by the content of my character. What Martin Luther King said, and I think that holds true with political parties as well. Don't label folk. They don't need to be labeled. But if their viewpoints are different or contrary to what you believe, then you have every right to disagree with that. But you don't have to be enemies. You know, I think about today is a day of mourning for President George Bush. And I didn't agree with his politics while he was president, all completely. But there was a certain kind of respect for the President of the United States, and there was a certain decency that folk had during those times. And most of the presidents that I can remember, Jimmy Carter, George Bush, Ronald Reagan, Obama, you know, Bill Clinton, when their terms were over, they all seemed to get along well. This is the only time where it seems to be a little dysfunctional, where the president is really like dividing people, and you know, and he's tweeting every day and just making outlandish statements. And I can't imagine President Obama or Bill Clinton doing some of the things that are happening in the Trump administration, and this country not going crazy about it. If, you know, with all the sex scandals or the cabinet people resigning, all the stuff that's going on. I just can't imagine it. Even Nixon, you know, wasn't quite as bad as it is now.
And let me get back to President Obama in just a second, because I still want to stay on John's Island
Yeah.
with the Charleston County Council race.
Okay.
Obviously, you switched parties to basically work with Joe Boykin, who is a Republican. Why Joe Boykin? Why then?
Well, let me correct you. I didn't switch parties.
Okay.
I switched candidates. That's the only time I've ever come out publicly and endorsed a candidate of either party.
Okay.
But I listened to Joe Boykin. I saw his fight against property when they were trying to put a wedding venue up in his area off Chisholm Road. His son goes to St. John's High School. And I listened. I've been to quite a few candidate forums, and I listened to him speak about some of the issues, local issues. And even though he was a proponent of 526, and a lot of folk were Nick's 526ers, Joe never wavered from that. He stood up and said, listen, I'm for the road. I know you might disagree with me, but this is the way I see it. And you develop a level of respect for a person who's honest and forthright. And I watched him very closely. And I recognized that he was willing to stand up and take shots from people that criticized him or didn't agree with him. But he never was disrespectful and didn't get too angry with him. He was just seemed to be a man full of integrity. So I made a decision, and I have been contacted by numerous people in the Democratic Party to find somebody to run against Ms. Johnson, because they felt like there was needed to be a change. These are Democrats, but nobody would primary against her. So, let the people made a decision. I've got nothing bad to say about Ms. Johnson at all. Personally, she's done nothing to me. I just picked a person that I thought was a better representative for everybody in the district. But what I think really doesn't matter is what the voters say. And the voters, made their statement, and we go by that. And I will stand in support of anything that she does, because she's my council person.
And you talked about not switching parties, but switching candidates.
Yes.
Who was that candidate that you supported before Joe Boykin?
I supported Ms. Johnson.
Okay.
Yeah, I did support Ms. Johnson the first time.
Okay.
And she, the second time, I didn't. But I do support her in certain areas. What I and I don't want to say anything bad about Ms. Johnson, because I think she's doing the best job that she can. And I'll just go with that. I'm not gonna say anything derogatory or bad or anything about what she's done. The voters have already said what they want.
Let me take you back to Johns Island. What is the future of the islands in your mind?
Oh my goodness. If you see the gentrification that's going on down here in Charleston, I can remember days when I walked down the east side of Line Street or back to Green and all that, and suddenly that's going away. The city has come up with big business. They've moved a lot of low-income people out. Some have come to Johns Island. A lot have moved up to North Charleston or even further out. Johns Island now tends to be like a mini resort area. Folk are moving down here, building $500,000 homes. They want houses by the water. Lands that a lot of my family members are on now are really in jeopardy, because all around them they're building and building and building. And their property values, the taxes are going to go up. There's so much development going on that people can't afford to live where they are. And I see this as being I see Johns Island as being a mini Hilton Head soon. We've already got Kiowa and Seabrook, but this is the gate through to those areas. Folk want to live right and live good. And we, as African American or Black people, we don't have the means to protect our property. And a lot of our property is heirs property. And so we have developers that come in They find an heir that's willing to share, to sell that little share that they own of the property, and they may be in New York or New Jersey or whatever, and they get in on it, and then they force the sale, and then they can buy that piece of property. A prime example is where my father and our family grew up, a place called LaGreeville.
Right.
And they call it MAD, it's on Johns Island. And my dad had 3 acres. And I think some of the other siblings had 4 acres or something like that. And my dad wanted to sell his piece, and he had it up for sale. Well, this developer comes, and we didn't know who he was, and he had been making contacts, calling me, calling my father, presenting himself as though I really, respect the work that happened on Johns Island through your grandfather, Esau Jenkins. I've been reading up on it, and I'd like to contribute to the rebuilding of the Progressive Club or anything, all this stuff. And so we're like, who is this guy coming out of Arizona? And to make a long story short, he came down and he gave a little financial donation to the Progressive Club, I think $3,000 or whatever. And he wound up, first he made a bid for the property, it was too low. And so my dad didn't want to sell, and then later on he upped his price, and he bought the piece of property, 3 acres. It's right by a place called Kiowa River Stables. It's like a horse thing, but it's a huge piece of property. And then he had a big community day because he promised that he was not going to try to redo anything with the land. He just wanted to conserve it. And he'd been trying to get in touch with another one of my relatives who lives in New York. Do you have his number? Do you have his number? I said, I don't have his number. I really don't know. I didn't grow up with this sibling. Come to find out that he bought the 3 acres my dad had, and he owned all this property. He bought the other side and had a big community days and brought a lot of folk out. He had a whole big thing. My sister came out and did the opening prayer, because he wanted a preacher, and the local preacher didn't trust him. So we had this big show, and I'm here for the community. Not many community people came. Come to find out he wanted to sell little lots because it's right there on the Kiowa River. He wanted to sell many lots for folk. So he misrepresented what he was trying to do when he bought the piece of property. He was trying to make money. And right now, I think a lot of things are in litigation, but not only that piece of property, but other pieces of property where they've cleared out. They didn't have any permits or anything, because the cost of doing business for them, they just do the work and they'll pay the fine, whatever it is. But they just continue to work because it's much cheaper, and they don't have to go through the red tape. So they've been sued in federal court, whatever. I believe it's coming up in January. But that's kind of what developers do. So anytime you hear about a new initiative going on Johns Island, your antennas go up when somebody says they want to come and they want to redevelop something. Because usually it's not in our best interest of the people who grew up and cultivated the land and are the native Johns Islanders, which were black folk, African Americans. Right now we're a minority on Johns Island. At one point, nobody wanted to come to Johns Island. Now we're a minority. There are more people moving in, and people are moving out. So African Americans and even Hispanics are lower in number than European Americans.
Let me get back to you,
Yes,
Abe
sir.
Jenkins.
Oh gosh.
Obviously, you were a campaign manager for Herbert S. Fielding for Senate 42
Yeah.
many years ago. And obviously, you're the owner of ABG Consulting. And obviously, you were the regional field director for Organizing for America, then Senator Barack Obama in Pennsylvania. What is it like to be you these days?
Relax. Well, what it's like for me is my primary interests now these days are to find young folk who can carry the torch for our people, that have the social justice and the community interests in their heart, in their bones, that they want to do this kind of work, to identify who they are and to get them introduce them to the right people so that they can use the gifts, the God-given gifts that they have, to continue to push our people in this country forward. And I've done branding as one.
Right.
Who, when I was with I was state field director for Obama for America, Brandon was a volunteer. And he came in and he volunteered, and his boss worked for me. I said, you need to hire this young guy. He's got something about him. He's passionate. And since then, I've seen him just blossom. And I've identified some folk on John's Island. Aaron White is one who actually ran for the constituent school board. He didn't win this time.
Right.
Did you interview him?
Yes, I just passed on.
Aaron is a bright young man with a good future, and he's got a heart and a passion for this. And I met with him, Isaac Legree on John's Island, and there's a couple more that I need to sit down with. And all I do is tell them, listen, you guys have what it takes to continue to push these things forward. I'm older now. I can't do it. I don't mind advising you, but I don't have the passion and the energy and all the things that you all have. And it's your time, it's your season to push forward. All the leadership that we've ever had in this country, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, these are young people. These weren't old people that did this stuff. These were folk that came out of college or what have you, and they were driven to make a difference. And it's your season. It's your season to grab it, go forward. Our people need the help. And I got this experience of working for Obama throughout the country, because I traveled throughout the country. Most people, when it comes down to election, they only know who the president is. And they vote strictly by the party. The good guys versus the bad guys. The Democrats are the good guys for us, Republicans are the bad guys. And you pretty much know who the president is. It's either Clinton or Bush or whoever that is, or Obama or Trump. So that's where people's heads are at. Locally, half of the time they don't even know who's running for what and what they do.
Was that Joe Boykin's problem?
Somewhat. That was Joe Boykin's somewhat, because what I will give credit to is the Democratic Party here, Brady Quirk-Garvin, as the chair, Amber Allen, and those folks, they worked hard. They worked hard, knocking on doors, making phone calls, doing all of the work that's required to do on the ground to get people to come out to vote. And they did their work. And Joe Cunningham, won Charleston County, and that's how he got elected. So they did a phenomenal job. They did a great job at what they do. I've got family members, even though I was supporting Joe Boykin, the others that are, I said, do you know who you're going to vote for? Democrat. I got to vote Democrat. I know we got to vote Democrat. And I never tried to say, no, I want you to split your ticket, you vote for who you feel like you want to vote for. I never try to persuade anybody to not vote for a candidate that they believe is the best candidate. So a lot of that is because we're not informed voters at local levels. At local levels, does it really make a whole lot of difference when you're running for city council or county council or register of deeds or probate judge? Does that really make a whole lot of difference? These folk are folk that are handling things that are happening to you where you live. Your flooding, your overdevelopment, your affordable housing. Do you have to tie that in with Trump? Or whoever the president is? So sometimes we've got to be a little bit more politically educated. The millennials, the younger folk, your Aarons and others, they get it. They're looking out for who's speaking to what my needs are. And older folk, and I understand, and I have no problem with that. I understand because we have been disenfranchised, and we had no place to turn, and the other party was totally against everything that you wanted to do. So they pretty much straight tickets, or what they call yellow dog Democrats. I don't care who it is, as long as you're a Democrat, I'm voting for you. And I'm more about accountability. I want to look at your record. What are you voting on? What are your issues, and how does it affect me and my family? That's where I'm at today. But that took me a long time to get at that state.
Abe Jenkins, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate this.
I appreciate you, man. You're doing good work, and you're well known all over Charleston County. Everybody knows about Quintin. Everybody knows about Quintin's show.
It's the grace of God.
So you're doing good work, and I appreciate you taking the time and having me join you today.
Anytime. You're very welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you.